Welcome to The Best Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Bradley H. Werrell, and we're here to explore options and potentials to help us grow as individuals and as a community with one another in these difficult times and challenging times. We're exploring all manner of potentials related to the human experience: physical, psychological, medical, spiritual. It's a wonderful opportunity that we now experience in this critical phase of our human evolution. And I welcome you to join us in our podcast, become more aware, and identify with people who are helpful and supportive of you in your efforts as a human being on this planet and elsewhere too. We're going to be meeting people who are doing things that are widely variant from what is so-called normal within our society, in the creative space, within the social space. Our common purpose, seeking to generate positive potentials to improve the lives of everyone in our sphere of influence, and to expand that sphere of influence so that we may positively influence others that are not yet engaged directly with us. That's the goal here. We will learn more about each other as we go. I wish you the very best. Thank you very much for tuning in. With this episode, we're going to reintroduce our good friend, Dr. Gregg Henriques of the James Madison University Psychology Department. He's a tenured professor and has written a theory of knowledge, the tree of knowledge approach to understanding human experience. We are having a second interview with him in 2 days because his approach has proved to be so influential to this observer that it has caused me to change the way I interact with my patients. And so we look forward to discussing this exciting phenomena with him. So I spoke with you on Monday morning, which seems like a long time ago because it's really interesting. I then spent about a day studying your work with the tree of knowledge system, and then found this the next day I was significantly altered my behavioral, my interactions with my patients and discussed matters. And I thought that was interesting enough to bring to your attention and to discuss with you, because it's like
Great.
The thing about psychology is it's like such esoteric content that it's very the nomenclature and the technical nature of the conversation just goes way over the head of everybody. And I'm like, it's just unapproachable, really. And it's like academic nonsense. And so it's like, what I found interesting was this, your justification theory brought it down to earth very nicely, condensed it down and allowed it to precipitate in a meaningful way at any level that people can understand that when you bring it down to the 2-year-old level.
Great. Yeah, no, that's, I'm completely in agreement that my field has so many different languages that you basically produce a lot of psychobabble, even though there is a lot of wisdom there, but it's very hard to cut through the chaos and the confusion and the static and elucidate what that wisdom is. And certainly that's part of the project.
That's very interesting. And I kind of describe it to the patients. I'm like, the justification theory is very explanatory for what we do in the social sphere with our language. And the 2-year-old asking the question why is everybody understands that because they've been around 2-year-olds, or they were a 2-year-old, right? And they remember fielding the question, why is the sky blue, Daddy? Right? And it's like, it's very interesting though. I've been analyzing the situation because I've been studying social systems probably 4 years. I tried to figure out what happened to America, and I went through this conspiratorial studies and came out on this other side, which is a psychological and even spiritual in nature. But your model with the digital interface being a new eruption of potential for consciousness to, I guess, generate a wider phenomena that is, I guess, encompasses the other social phenomena or the transcultural phenomena. is an interesting construction, and it caused me to think about it. And it's like this. It's like it occurs to me that you've talked to Jordan Hall, I saw, and I appreciated that. Instead of watching the debate with the presidential candidates, you watched the consciousness discussion with Vervaeke and his gang, and that was a good trade. I think you did a great job. I didn't do as well. That's okay, but I played catch up, and I watched that and I enjoyed it greatly. But it's like this blue church function, and it's the red religion and the blue church in Jordan Hall's rendition. And I wanted to discuss that with you because it's like my understanding of what has gone on, which is the blue church is I drew a picture. Let's simplify it like this, which is a central broadcast transmission of meaning into the general public. And red religion is the other way around, which is that the individual has it's just an inverted function. So it's like it's like the function is this, it's a pole shift is all it is, a polarization, and the individual being a receiver of centrally broadcast information to make sense of the world, or what you called the sense making is justification, right? As opposed to
certainly can be, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, our propositional sense making, we do other kinds of sense making. Like if you use John Vervaeke's 4 Ps, that's a good way of going for sense making. So we have procedural, participatory, perspectival sense making systems that are more embodied and phenomenological. But our propositional sense making, our narrating and explicit shared beliefs about the world, what is, what ought to be, all of that is the propositional, and the justification systems theory is really a theory of our propositional knowing and how it functions in our social relations.
Right. So my impression is it's the set I'm talking about is the propositional set of justification of social systems in the widest possible sense. And it's the interesting function of it is that it appears that the 2016 election was the failure of the established order broadcast media as a sense-making mechanism for that propositional system to support the established order, in which the computer age, or the digital, as you call it, allowed the individual to make sense of the situation in a higher resolution value system informationally than was the broadcast system. So it's like, it makes more sense what I've learned myself through my information gathering processes versus that which is coming from the central source. And therefore I turn it over, I'm change my polarity to be, I gather my information and I don't seek validation from Walter Cronkite anymore.
Well, I do think we're in the midst of a major, absolutely my frame, like Jordan Hall, or at least I agree with him on this and have my own angle on it, but it's actually very similar. There's an institutional infrastructure that gets set up that functions pretty well, consolidates from 1950 to say mid-1990s, and it maintains its structure, but it begins to, for a whole host of reasons, becomes increasingly outdated, but it's not able to evolve enough. Its infrastructures result in an enormous amount of inertia, and it's not engaging in the flexive adaptive growth patterns that we would hope to see. And instead, it's quickly now becoming a dinosaur system. And then there's all these other emergence from beneath, the individual, small group, partially a function of what the digital affords, that's now creating all of this disequilibrium, some good, some not so good, but nonetheless, a transformational process is underway.
Now that's I would point to Professor Carol Quigley, the historian at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. He talked about social instrumentalities. So we accumulate together to afford us an ability to provide some common good for ourselves as a community. inevitably institutionalized, and that's kind of like this institutionalization is the ossification and rigidity and that very process you're talking about. I'd say it's an inevitability.
Yeah, yeah.
And so in the blue church thing, the way I see it is that's the same as cultural hegemony, right? So the central broadcaster is now seeking to broadcast the cultural preferences into the general public. And
Exactly.
it's like, so it's the overturning of that system, and it's just a roiling mix up, and it's like, well, until we sort it out.
Right, it's a nightmare in terms of, so what I perceive is happening is that the knowledge systems that are necessary for the digital age require a very quick upgrade of the old institutional modernists into postmodernist kinds of systems. But the speed of the upgrade that's required because of the changes that are happening is outstripping what the normal developmental process of a paradigm is. Okay, so our paradigm shifts are happening faster and faster. Paradigm shift is, what are the model of what is and ought, what is the central mode of justification, which then legitimizes and normalizes practices, and all of that is embedded. And I use psychology for an example. So psychology got itself tracked into an empirical system of justification, and then established and networked that system, and that's how you would advance in the field. At least from where I sit, it's crystal clear that that's inadequate. But the system now is so entrenched in that particular process that even though it's known to be inadequate, and it's definitely known not to be, not only known to be inadequate in terms of within the system, but in terms of what the system should be trying to do for the world and for society, it's completely inadequate. Yet there's no capacity for the system to actually upgrade fast enough and respond to that. So it's entrenched and then stuck, and then it's quagmired into a nightmare. And at least as far as I'm concerned, this is what kicks me out of the discipline, basically, and now into the outside. It's just sort of like, this system's not.
What do you mean by that? Like, that's what kicks me out of the system. I don't understand that. I want you to explain what you're meaning by that with specific reference to yourself.
Sure. I grow up inside, the academy. So, both my parents have their doctorates. My dad's a professor. My mom's an adjunct professor. I go from, my undergraduate to my master's degree with like 1 year off into a doctoral, into a postdoctoral at the University of Pennsylvania with Beck, and who's a father of cognitive therapy. So I'm like nested inside of the system, okay? And I'm playing by its rules. And I'm under the impression that there are various ways to make differences in the system. And so I then carve a path, which in retrospect, the path that I ended up carving was too far outside of the institutional power structures and too much alone, even though I played by the rules. And what I mean by that is that I did go theory, and that is unusual. So that's one move that's unusual. But I did establish myself first in relationship to the traditional authority, like Beck, and published empirical and knew all how to do that. Now I could have continued in that little trail, and I stayed in as long as I could take it, and before I needed my freedom to get out. But then I jumped into a James Madison University. I say not Harvard by any stretch, but it's a solid place with a unique kind of opportunity, and I could then continue to publish, and I did get published systems, but what happened over time is that there are a couple of ways to think about what I saw. So one broad way of thinking about it, certainly how I think about it now, is that I was positioning myself with what I now would be able to label as a metamodern sensibility. Okay. So metamodernism is a sensibility of the thing that comes after postmodernism. Okay. So you have a modernist sensibility is coming off of the Enlightenment that basically says, hey, we can measure stuff, we can generate objective truths, we can do inference to best explanation, and then we can generate, policies and make claims and all of this. Okay. That's a modernist sensibility. And inside the academy and psychology, an empiricist modernist sensibility is what drives the vast majority of established psychological scientists, both in traditional psychology, like developmental cognitive personality psychology, and in what's called clinical science, which is the empirical scientific extension into treatment and psychopathology. Okay, so they have a modernist view of the world. All right. Then in most practice areas in counseling psychology, okay, what you have is an emerging postmodernist view. The postmodernist view is that, oh my gosh, the white male Christian hegemony that comes off of the Enlightenment then creates a colonialist package and really utilizes science to legitimize that hegemony, and then silences marginalized voices. And thus we need to compensate for indigenous populations, feminist, critical race theory, and then there's a suspicion that's brought to bear on empiricist claims and empiricist technologies like IQ testing. Okay? And that represents really the two dominant mindsets in psychology. So they are sort of, established modernists, and with a postmodern critique that now is getting traction in the applied world of therapy. Okay, I came in and basically was the metamodernist includes and transcends both of those sensibilities. Okay, and basically what it argues is that you have the thesis of modernist science. Okay, which is partially true in the sense that you can generate sort of transcendental truth claims in some contexts that are valuable. The periodic table of the elements, certainly in chemistry, is a good example of that. So then, basically, then there's this whole question about, well, what claims can you make, truth, scientific kind of claims about what I call mental behavior, which is the proper subject matter of psychology in my language system. And basically you get, the postmodern critique of the modernists that basically says, well, virtually all the claims you make are really embedded in a normative system that it really pre-exists and predetermines the certain kinds of findings that you'll get, how the people that you study, how you create norms, how you create value structures. And it's not up to the task of separating out the socio-historical context and underlying grammar of power and justification. That's the big tension. Okay. The metamodernist synthesis that becomes an antithesis, a deconstructive critique of modernism really is what the post-structural postmodern identity is. It's a deconstructive critique. Okay. So you have a thesis and antithesis. The metamodern sensibility is a synthesis of those two dialectic. And the process, and at least that's what people are oriented to. And what I found then is essentially a pathway for psychology to find the appropriate synthesis between those two sensibilities. The problem, though, what the institutional infrastructure was not set up, even though at one-on-one levels I could explain people and people could see it and make it click. There was no motivation for the institution, okay, to invest in this from either side. The enemy, they get their identity. The idea that some white guy came along and had an insight at the age of 27 that solves the problem, is super obnoxious from a postmodernist perspective. Okay, and the idea that it's mostly theoretical rather than empirical is super antithetical from the modernist perspective. And so at an institutional level, it basically says, hey, both of you guys have right things to say, but you're both wrong in some fundamental ways. Here's the pathway forward. I found individually over and over and over again, people would say, oh my God, this is brilliant. This is great. Institutionally, there's no real leveraging to then move the flow of resource attention and structural change. And so over time, I became increasingly disenfranchised. And then actually Jordan Peterson pops out, and that I got in a fight with my program about Jordan Peterson. Basically I was fascinated. I learned about him in 2017, end of 2016. He becomes famous in 2016 and I hear about him. I start tracking him. and then start tracking the controversy. And from my vantage point, this is we can just sit on the sidelines and watch what people say about him, learn an enormous amount about both psychology, the social sciences, progressivism inside the academy, his reaction to it. It's a very, very fascinating thing. And I was under the impression that, you could then quickly identify the unintelligent extremes by the way in which they reacted. And I had faith, because I directed the program for 12 years, from 2005 to 2017, but I then stepped off in 2017. But I still sort of had the sense that I was still kind of owed like the status of a former director. So we start following him, or he comes up in classes. Well, there's a subset of students that are not happy with Jordan Peterson, that are very clearly in the sort of academic postmodern camp. And they basically then just make proclamations about what he is, that I find to be, from my vantage point, unsophisticated. But then me making that judgment that that's unsophisticated was then deemed by other faculty as not acceptable. And so now all of a sudden you have a very interesting dynamic.
That's a very good descriptor there. I find it to be, so I think it's saltier than interesting even.
So, but ultimately that may be even more sort of like, I think the knowledge, intelligence, sense-making systems have started to really lose their way. They're crystal clear paths that I can see, but the system itself is getting increasingly chaotic and confused, and can't ground itself in first principles. It can't ground itself in what it is. And that caused me to pop off and start following things like Rebel Wisdom, learned about the Metamodern movement and the intellectual dark web and deep web, and the Jordan Halls and Daniel Schmachtenbergers of the world. And that's so I actually had the exact same training as a Jordan Peterson. I'm a clinical personality theoretical psychologist. And so I got sucked into that. And then all of a sudden I start hanging out with people and see the sensibility of Schmachtenberger and Hall and Zach Stein and realize, oh my God, this is exactly my sensibility. These guys have been, doing their thing, and I've been doing my thing completely separately. But the schema and values and intuitive ways in which we make sense out of the world, and the explicit ways we make sense out of the world overlap in norms.
It's an interesting function. And my father was a historian. I went to high school in Radford.
Mm-hmm.
I'm right down the street from you.
Yeah.
And the bottom line, though, I was soured on the academy just from hearing his experience dealing with the politics of that nonsense. It's just nonsense. And I regard the institution, and I went to a liberal arts college, and I found that thing to be uninteresting. It's just ossified nonsense. And it's like the issue is this: the institutions are too corrupt to do their job. And that's my assessment. And it's like, I think the institutions in general are, and it's like, it is the central broadcast model, which is authority by position and not authority by argument.
Yeah.
Which is like, okay, Socrates said everything you need to do. He drank the hemlock, which is like, I'd rather drink the hemlock than put up with your nonsense, and I'm not leaving town, right? Mm-hmm. And so I regard you as it's interesting. I was listening to your recent talk with a young Slovakian fellow.
Jacob,
right. And I called you a cultural federalist. It's like that's what the issue is. This, and it's like the issue I see essentially it's universalist claims being contested in this field of discussion that we're having now, which is like this. So there's the blue church it has a universal claim, and then there's a universal claim coming up from the other people that are seeking to meet the model you're looking at, which is I call cultural federalism. And it's like the issue. It goes back to the Reformation. So the Catholic Church in 1550, and then it gets turned over with the Protestant Revolution.
Sure.
Then it gets turned over again with the institution of the capitalist institution, finance capitalism, and certainly with monopoly capitalism, which is we're in the terminal stages of, I think, is like how I'm thinking. Because if we're not in the terminal stages, it's pretty terminal for all of us, I fear.
Yeah, we need to change the direction a bit.
So what I see is the way I see this is, and I think the rebel wisdom guys are interesting. And it's like, because they talk about creating the non-religious religion. Okay. And I'm like, this is like, it's the same thing, but it's like recovering leftists, I call that, which is to say, I don't want to say it's religious, although we're going to make a non-religious religion. I'm like, what in the hell does that mean? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes like this, that my attitude is I'm making a religious non-religion, which is the same, we're aiming at the same thing. Okay. But it's like this, it has to do with values. What are our values, and what's the basement level of human values that you're striking at? Because it's like, we all have values, and it's like high value down to a low value, but low value is still some positive value, even though it may be negligible.
Sure.
And so it's just, how do we order it and structure it and allow for diversity in that structuring process, and allow for people to maintain their values in their local community, which is just the Federalist Plan from the Enlightenment, which is I regard the American Revolution as the apex enlightenment, political structure. And so it's like this, when you say the suggestion metacultural consciousness or what I call cultural federalism, you're just inverting it back from the top, the tyrannical broadcast media that has evolved under corporate capitalism, which I call the blue church. You're inverting the values again, and I'm like, you're not going to do better than that American Revolution with regard to the Federalist Plan, local control, let people make local decisions because that matches the local conditions most accurately, and then make rules by which we can work together, although our values may be different. And if you want to, why don't you go somewhere else where they do what you do? And that's like so my problem is that it's the universalist claims, and I worry about and I won't say Marxist, but I do mean that, which is I worry about revolutionaries who seek to impose a universal aim upon the rest of us. Those people are quite dangerous. It's quite dangerous, and that's the problem and the fear. So it's like I don't know what that means. I regard you as an ally in this contest, which is to generate a potential for cultural federalism, but we're just back to federalism again, which is the properly enforced, which is not centrally authoritarianism, right?
Yeah.
Authoritarianism.
Well, as somebody who's at James Madison, I can appreciate that. And there is a lot of truth. I mean, the metamodern sensibilities and integrated pluralism. If you depending on what, but if you do blue church as top down, and then you have this sort of potentially radical individualism, and if that's spurred with a postmodern relativism, right, then that spreads out, and you definitely need to have the integrated pluralistic dialectic. And so where you are on the pendulum, absolutely, and indeed in terms of the federalism, and religion, both of those things, the metaphor of the garden, of course, there's a tree in a garden sitting behind me. I can speak to the mythos of religion in a particular way. And I think we need to, and for a whole host of different reasons. But the idea, one of the elements of the idea is cultivating the garden across socio-ecological scales, starting with your own local life, right? You want to manage that, and then your community, and then the state, and then the nation, and then the nation's in relation at a transnational level, and then have ultimate hierarchical values at a global level that allows us reference points.
That's right. It's like, well, I kind of look at the whole thing. It's like the consciousness as the basic element, and we have to pick our own star to guide by, as long as it's not too far out of whack with the social environment in the broadest possible scheme. And it's like this, it's like religions evolved because people agree that there is a set of values that is the transcendent set, and they don't have to agree with all the other values of other groups. But it is like there's a certain reasonable territorialism with regard to that, which is that's where the rub starts getting rough, because it's like, okay, do they get to exclude people who don't agree? And certainly, I think they can exclude certain practices, and because they decide what's good and what's not as good, and it's within certain bounds, and it's like, okay, it's a tough balancing act there.
Yeah. Well, the ultimate, I mean, in the unified theory language, that process gives rise to the ultimate justification that, for me at least, of guiding, which is B, that which enhances dignity and well-being with integrity. So these become the big three, dignity, well-being, and integrity become a big three tripartite model of value clusters. And there are a whole bunch of reasons as to why I arrived at those and what they are and what they represent. And certainly I don't see them as, absolute in the sense that what I see them as is my integrated pluralistic view on meta value. And there are other values and other traditions. One of the things that I am really struck by is the wisdom traditions. When you listen to them as a whole, the amount of overlap that they offer and the amount of similarities in which they grapple with. There certainly is pluralism and diversity, but there's an enormous thread of overlap and potential integration. And as long as you lean into those and are guided by those kinds of processes, the overlap in them is crucial, and of finding a path for coordination and realizing what's relevant for across the scale, to use some of John Vervaeke's language. That's at least, so I think that's the path forward we need to engage in. Absolutely.
Yeah, so the function of it in my mind is that the conversation has to be accessible by the regular people, right? And it's like this, just so that because it's like this, it has to be simple terminology for simple people, because people are not going to try to learn what dialectic means, okay? And you got to like this, and that's just the start, because it's going to be a compound sentence of multiple of these words that are just from 2000 years ago.
Certainly the distilling process has to be there. I mean, I think right now you're getting people who are sort of on the edge, and they're going to have a particular, ability set and vocabulary and grammar ability that, but we do need to figure out how to translate those conversations into real world conversations and real world language systems that resonate quickly with people. And certainly some of my language tries to do that, like justification. If you
that works.
hand that to people, that goes pretty quick, and people are like, oh my gosh, I see it.
I was impressed, because I deal with everybody, just average people, and it's like I enjoy chatting with them, and I chat with them about such matters, and the justification theory makes sense, like poop. And I was impressed by it. That's how come I'm like, I better talk to him again, even though we had some difficulties making the contact. Because I was impressed by it, to be honest with you. It's quite impressive, and it makes sense. It's just a matter of what I see is happening is changing consciousness it's like a quantum effect, and it can happen suddenly, like an inspiration, and suddenly your polarity shifts, and you understand where it was all murky before. Now it's clear, and I that's kind of how I expect this to go. It's I have faith in the consciousness to be able to make sense of that which appears to be nonsensical suddenly. And I think it's like a sudden shift, the chemical balance tips, and it's just changes, the solution changes entirely quickly. And that's how I see this going. I guess Mark Twain said it well. He says it's like going bankrupt, slowly at first, and then all of a sudden. And I'm like, that's what I think is going to happen.
Well, I certainly on not this Monday, but the next Monday, my friend Rob Scott will be talking about fundamental shift. We hooked up he developed his own deep philosophy through lots of study, but really he's an autodidact, but his fundamental ideas about consciousness align with the unified theory very closely. And it's called fundamental shift. And we've definitely been talking about, how, if we weave enough of us together that actually, and then we can distill the proper language and then communicate that, and then there will be a tipping point, so that then both the social influence and the language and the necessity of it all hit at the same time. And if that hits, you're right, boom, the social forcing will change, and the justification awakening will happen, and there'll be a phase shift. That is certainly hopeful, and I believe necessary, because the time horizon, I thought the time horizon, 5 years ago, we got till 2050, and it feels a lot more imminent that we need phase shifts than 2050 from my current consciousness.
That's an interesting point. Now, what I see, regarding the current so-called the crises that are influencing or are being projected into the public by the cultural elite, which is specifically the climate change and specifically the COVID-19. I regard it as intentionally driven to drive anxiety for the purpose of controlling the population, as opposed to a sort of contrived reality projection, amplification by social institutions. And it is for the purpose of driving anxiety into the public to cause them to influence their behavior. And so I'm not saying these are not actually occurring functions, but I believe them to be exaggerated claims, and driven by authoritarian institutional projections into the public and as the blue church projections. Okay, and so while I say I think that because you listen to the wild claims that Al Gore made whenever he started his crusade, right? And it's like this, New York's still not underwater, although everybody's leaving town and nobody's going back in the buildings anyway because this mask wearing and such. And so I do see it as I don't see it as dire as it appears to be taken by many, and I see it as an inevitability that the consciousness is going to shift, because there's clearly things happening. It's corporates are doing things that are uncalled for and unreasonable given the circumstances, and it's enriching very few people at the expense of everybody, and it's like none of that's acceptable. And but the issue is it's a politically defined function, because it's like the basic structure of our social environment is the corporate capitalism, and the corporate capitalism is monopoly capitalism, and it is the corporations they're not real, right? They are legal fictions, and they are politically defined, and we have complete control over them if we take control of our politics. And so what I recognize this there's that movie that you brought up, and I don't remember the name of it, Social Dilemma. And it's like this. It talks about the partitioning of people, the polarization of the political sphere by artificial intelligence, and I see that as being a legitimate function. And I also see that as not necessary, but I look at it as a divide and conquer function by corporates to control the populace. And it's but what I see is there's the two answers that come out of this polarization, which is we need a revolutionary function, and we need to take control of the politics and control the corporations. And it's like they're mutually incompatible. That's the issue. And it's like this. It's like, and I happen to be a reactionary or an anti-counter revolutionary, which is I'm pro-American revolution. And it's like the revolutionary guys, I'm anti. They're really counter-revolutionary. I'm like, no, we're not having that. We're not having that. Okay. So it's like this. These people are right, but it can be achieved by conservative means. That's my point. And I'm like, let's just not fight about this. Let's just handle it within the circumstances that we have, and have a equitable conversation about this. And there's no need for revolting behavior.
I definitely think that minimizing reactivity, especially hostile, destructive reactivity, is a good thing.
That's interesting. It's like I see a lot of what has recently occurred as provocative acts or psychological warfare. And it's like, so there's I point to Erwin Rommel, who was the general of the Africa Corps in World War II, for those of you who haven't studied the war.
Obviously, yes. I was like, Rommel as in World War II?
There you go. Erwin Rommel. Field Marshal. So Erwin Rommel had one airplane, I am told, at some point in the Africa War. He's fighting the British, and he had one airplane. And it's like, what do you do with the one airplane? Because it can't really be decisive. What he did was he took the engine of the airplane off and put it on the back of a truck and left its propeller on so that it will blow a bunch of dust up in the air and drive it around behind the hills. And now the Brits think a tank column is coming around the side. They make a bad move. That's psychological warfare, to make your enemy make a bad mistake. And this is what I see is happening. It's like provocative acts that are not decisive in and of themselves, seeking to cause the enemy, the perceived enemy, to make a mistake.
Yeah.
Like, so I see lots of provocative acts, and it's like, okay, so that's all that I see. Lots of posturing. There's no conflict, and I hear talk of conflict. It's just quite disturbing, and I hope to avoid such conflicts because it's too destructive. Nobody can afford it. We have enough problems. Thank you very much. Right?
Right. If we start into actual military conflict, then we're definitely on the wrong end of the progress curve.
That's right. It's like that. So we try to maintain good relations, and
I'm definitely for that. Definitely.
What an event! It's a very turbulent times to be alive, right?
It is, absolutely. And I know for a lot of people, it's fraught with a lot of suffering. I feel very fortunate. I'm in a place where I'm, pretty high water away from that, and it's also an unbelievably exciting time if it's framed right, and with an enormous amount of potential and change and uncertainty, but also, crisis and opportunity are two sides of the same coin. So
that's it. That's crisis in Chinese. The two characters, danger and opportunity, right? It's
that's
like,
right.
May you live in interesting times, and it's like that. When I was 20, I thought that was pretty cool. I want to live in interesting times. Now I'm pushing 50. I'm like, whoa. It's like,
I don't need this wave to get any higher. This is like, we're surfing this thing. That's plenty. This thing gets another couple of things on it. It's a crash on it.
That's it. It's a tightrope. It's a tightrope. It's very exciting, and it's like, well. It's interesting because it is like I think that there are very challenging moments coming here. Very narrow passage that we have to weave, and it's okay. It's okay, and it's good to be able to engage with forward-thinking people like yourself, and to try to coagulate positive change in the future with such a like-minded group of people, and as we get near each other and try to coordinate our spins together, so we're like in sync.
Well, that's exactly what. So, from my vantage point, you sort of you set up core values, core knowledge structures, right, and then that becomes a transcendental beacon of sorts, right, and then that will draw people from a wide variety of different domains that have many different opinions, perspectives, values, ideas, sense-making systems, right. And then as that developmental process works its way out, then you're doing the integrative pluralism, right, of demonstrating the processes of the kinds of civilization evolution that we need to engage in right there. And by then showing the diversity that can be come together and effectively integrated through good conversation, through shared dialectics in this case, hanging out, and then and then that becomes the kind of models, ideally, that then get seeded in various places. And if they can propagate, then that's a transformational process. So
that's right. Well, I guess see it as human interactions is where it's at.
Mm-hmm.
What an
definitely
thing. It's slower than you want it to be, right? It's like you were Jacob, was the fellow's name, Slovakia?
Mm-hmm. Jacob.
Yeah, Jacob. And it's like, I was watching that, it's like being in the wilderness. I'm like, yeah, I feel that pain. Because I was like this, I'm kind of outsider too. And it's like this, it's like, what a difficult passage just to be able to get through the mess to get to where you are right now, right?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
There was a good point in that conversation with John Vervaeke and his companions the other day. That was the consciousness thing, which is like your future self is around the corner and you don't quite know what that means. Right. And it's like this. And it made me think of this thing, which was kind of funny, which was I used to say this. It's like, if I could meet my 18-year-old self, I'd pop me in the head to wake me up. And I'm like, you know what? That's exactly what happened. I like got the living crap beat out of me to get to be right here in front of you, because it's like just it's been a head knocker to be able to gain the consciousness that I have, which is like unforeseeable. Like in a million years, I never would have thought to come to this conclusion set. And it has been quite a rocky road. And it's like, okay, I wouldn't wish it upon anybody, because it's just rough, man. It's just rough. Like, because it's the issue is misconceptions about the actual way the world is functioning, such that you have to hit the wall to understand that that is a wall and it is not moving, no matter how many times you smack it with your head. Okay, there's a door over here though, and it goes around the corner. It's like, whoa, who'd have expected that, right?
Right, no doubt.
Stunning. So it's like
life's lessons.
Yep. And it's like, okay, so you like the trick in my mind is making good on all that wisdom that it took to get you around the corner and off the pathway and around the corners, and try to project that back to the young ones so they don't have to do that mistake making nonsense, because it's too much effort and cost, right?
Right. Well, the nature of human development will always be that the bumps and bruises are required for the deepening of the soul. But nonetheless, there are different ways in which that can be channeled and cultivated that maximize the likelihood of good depth without trauma and derailment. And what's happening now is the number of people that are traumatized, shallowly stuck in parasites of mind that then freeze them and then create all sorts of neurotic loops, and difficulty in finding meaningful paths. It's just unacceptable. That's why the mental health crisis, it's just one facet of the struggles that we face. And obviously as a clinical psychologist, that's certainly strong on in the fore of my concerns.
No, it's interesting because it's like with the medical paradigm, and it's the same thing. It's like this is like the you look at I regard the institutions as generally corrupt, and the issue is this is, instead of it seeking to achieve the goal like okay, military victory, boom, right? World War II was one of these, goal oriented, and they struck and they're done. The situation morphed where it's not so much we're trying to win, but we're going to try to manage the conflict. And that managing the conflict, there's all the institutions get some value out of not achieving a goal.
No,
medicine is like that, and it's just the most awful thing. Which is, we manage diabetes instead of make it so the patient's not diabetic by education and processing their behavior to a different state, which could avoid their pathology.
Yeah, no, I think that, the contingency structure of the corporate capital system, is basically bottom line. And when it's basic bottom line, then it's an instrumentality toward a particular kind of contingency that has certain consequences that are good. It's good for turning the earth into material shit that we can consume. That's one good thing is that it is, and that can be good. But it's, in many, many ways, it's got a lot of negative externalities, and it's not properly oriented to exactly your point. And what I'm hearing is there are actual real goods that we really should be directing the force of our economic resource power towards, and we need to have a contingency system that actually calibrated so when it actually solves the problem, we gain more energy in that way. And there's definitely a huge amount of misalignment. This actually is embedded in one of the pieces of the unified theory, which is the influence matrix. So the influence matrix is a map of our social motivation. And it says that we're tracking social influence and relational value. Now, social influence is the capacity to move other people in accordance with our interests in an instrumental way. Relational value is being known and valued by important others. Okay? And they're two sides of the same coin in the sense that if you're known and valued by important others, then they will work on your behalf. If you love your kids, you will sacrifice for them. If you love your wife, things like that. But they're also quite different. You can manipulate people, gain social influence, but you wouldn't add to your social value, relational value. In fact, you might detract from it. But what capital labor structure does is it basically instrumentalizes social influence. In other words, it basically turns people into means to end to create capital resource functions. Okay, and then how much you institutional control, and then we mistake our desires for status markers that are indicative of instrumental influence, okay, that often then sacrifice relational value. But ultimately, the heart feeds off of much more of relational value. So what you want is a social capital system that actually enhances mutual relational value, the experience of being known and valued by important others nested in an ecology, socio-ecology. So you want to be known and valued by your family, that's in context, known and valued by the community, and so forth. And it is then you want the social influence to be mediated by known and valued for a whole host of reasons, because that's going to be a much more stable structure. When it's mediated by contingent social influence, and everybody's suspicious, and everybody puts on a face, and everybody doesn't necessarily feel secure, and everybody's willing to manipulate. This is very similar to what they talk about as game A in, if you listen to some of the things like Jordan Hall, Tanner Schmachtenberger, Jim Rutt. Game A, which is a competitive resource control orientation. We actually need to figure out the contingencies that create much more of a mutual embeddedness that fosters autonomy and freedom, but at the same time cultivates the yoking of relational value and social influence together, which is a much more stable. And in fact, if you look at what the hunter-gatherers are able to do in their relations, it's basically that. And the question is, can we do that at scale, given the unbelievable diversity of cultures and exchanges and opportunities we have from jumping around from relation to relation? That's the great question as far as I'm concerned. But we need structures that orient that contingency and build. So you look, what are the kinds of systems that foster that relational value that's going to be key to our experience?
There you go. That's right. And it's what a major task to even think of the architecture of that, like social architecture. It's a big task, and it's like, I guess, goes to anthropology, sociology, in addition to the psychology, to see if we can generate some kind of solution that is matches. We can make a map to that positive end. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an unbelievable task. That it has to be. The bottom line, though, my hope is that it's incremental. That we and I at least can see why we didn't get it before. I mean, we didn't have just a basic right framing, and now there is an opportunity for qualitatively better framing. And if we get a qualitatively better framing at the understanding end, you get more and more people sharing that conceptual grammar and language, and then the capacity to solve. If we all understood the problem and could communicate and have the shared values, we'd be a lot more likely to be able to find a pathway to effective solutions. And so that's, at least, I think we're on the way to that. That's at least my optimistic hope.
There you go. That's wonderful. I think that's a good place to end this. That's the right answer, because we'll just keep on hammering away at it and studying each other's works and communicating and trying to smooth out the rough edges and get to some agreeable, proper alignment of consciousness. It's all about the intentionality, right? That's how I view it. Intention is the key element of all consciousness.
Right, absolutely. And so arrange values, recognize that actually the core of the nervous system is an investment value system. Recognize the top is our moral values. We organize our investment values, our moral values, our social influence, proper justification, and then boom, we can do a lot better. Yeah, at least that's the constraints outlined. Now let's dance our way to it.
Feel your way to the edge. It works.
We'll feel your way to the edge from there. All right,
man. Well, I thank you for taking a minute.
Hey, man, I'm glad we had a chance to catch up. So.
All right. Well, enjoy the fall colors in Virginia. I'm in Arizona. I don't get so much. We get this kind of subtle thing. We call it fall.
Yeah. No, actually, I was just seeing a very orange tree that wasn't orange a week ago. I was like, oh well, October is here.
Beautiful. Well, enjoy the season.
All right. Good seeing you guys. Take care.
Greg. That was a wonderful discussion with Dr. Gregg Henriques of the JMU Department of Psychology in Harrisonburg, Virginia. Please visit his website, GreggHenriques.com/overview-of-the-system.html. I think that it's well worth the effort, and it certainly was transformational with me, and I think it will be transformational for you. I wish you the best and have a great evening. Thank you for your attendance. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Best Medicine Podcast with Bradley H. Werrell, D.O. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe below, either over there or over there. Also, if you're interested in a medical consultation with myself, there's also information below.